So I'm going to check in for where they're at. Now, this athlete has a race coming up early November, a 4-part stage race, team time trial road race, a second road stage, and another team time trial. Shortest sort of stages. So if I pop open the seasonal planner chart to get an idea of where they're at, they're 2 weeks in currently to a 10-week build phase going into that race. So I'm going to continue that progression now. So the athlete has actually entered a lockdown, so we'll have to adjust some of the sessions that we're getting to do. They wanted to do quite a bit of unstructured work, so using Tuesday and Wednesday as intense unstructured days with a bunch ride, and then adding some structure around that. But that's not going to be on, so we're going to need to come up with some alternatives. So how I'm going to start this is the key session that I wanted them to do was, and that I identified as a weakness from some analysis I did previously, was that their VO2 max power needed work. So I've been getting them to do this 4x4 VO2 max session, and I'm going to get them to keep repeating that, possibly with some overloads for the next blocks, for the next 4 weeks. So I schedule in 4-week blocks. So I'll start by copying these so that they're doing these each week and continuing to progress. So next week, now, so they came off a deload week 2 weeks ago. So I'm going to get them to keep building for this week. And then this week here, I'm going to make a lighter week. So I'm just going to make a note of it here. Which I'll then put into a week note here, but just for my planning purposes for now. So light week, a lighter deload week this week, which means this week needs to be a peak week. So what I'll do is repeat that session. Now this session will stay the same no matter how the week fits into the building cycle. So that'll be 1, 2, 3, and then I'll probably want to overload this workout. So this is in my intensity section of this workout library here. 4x4, so you're looking at 16 minutes at VO2 max power. So overload for this one, I'll get them to do an extra rep. I won't increase the overload it in terms of adjusting the duration of the sets, because the athlete kind of gets used to doing similar sets. So I'll just change this to a 5x5 for the next 2 weeks in there. And that's a really solid 5-week progression, and we can see how the athlete's doing on this week and adjust from there. So other key session I'm going to want this athlete to do is, let's see, bunch ride would usually be it, but that's not going to be on. So I need to come up with an alternative for the other key session in the week. Some other form of intensity. Now they've got some climbing in this race. Some of these road stages have short climbs, sort of 8 minutes and less. So probably going to complement the VO2 max work, target some threshold work. So what I'll do is pick a threshold session where they're going to be able to get it done. Now they're probably going to be on the trainer for it, because a place where the athlete lives, there's not really any places where they can get a sustained effort done. So I'm looking for some sustained threshold work that's going to be possible on the trainer. What I'd probably put in is, I will go for now, having a look back, something simple, something that's easy to see the progression in. And I also want some variance, so not a sustained effort, because they're doing sustained efforts on the Friday. So I'll put in something with some over-unders, 3x16. I'll do this. So 3x16 minutes, first one sustained, and then second 2 with surges. And I'm very big on repeating sessions so that the athlete can see progression, because there's always a learning factor to doing a workout. So I'll get them to do this threshold session for the next 3 weeks on a Tuesday, as opposed to doing the bunch. Now that's suitable for the road. They can also probably do it on the trainer if they need to. That's 2 and 10 sessions per week. Now, given the athlete is used to doing Tuesday, Wednesday intensity and a Saturday bunch, I'm going to give them I want them to do an unstructured session that is still intense. So I want them to just do a Zwift race, 30, 40 minutes, ripping in, getting sort of the pace dictated to them and getting a good intense session in. So what I'll do is give them a Zwift race. I've got an unstructured workout here, just as Zwift race and some details on what they need to enter. That's sort of 40 minutes long. So I'll enter that in as well. Probably, let's see, at least this week. Now this is a deload week, so before I start scheduling too much more, I'll put in where I want them to have the rest day. So I want them to have rest on the Monday. They're usually having 2 rest days per week, aside from this deload week. So I probably want to, in terms of deload weeks like this, where it's not a total week off, it's just a slight deload, is I just make usually for most athletes, the first half of the week needs to be lighter. So what I'll do is I'll still get him to do the intensity. I'm just cutting the volume out. So I'll get him to do a recovery ride on the Wednesday, VO2 max session. Saturday, I'll get him to go outside again. So that means 2 intense. Okay, I have to put in another unstructured ride on the Saturday, just endurance, 2.5 hours. And then he usually has 1 day off. So Sunday's going to be off for the weekend. Oop. So putting in a rest day for Sunday. Then we look at this week. So we've got 320 T-score, 6.5 hours. TSB I'll have to fill in this week before I do that. But so this session I'm going to leave as pending, and I'll see what this prior week looks like, which will be a build week, and sort of go from there. So again, I'll do another rest day on the Sunday. The athlete has some kids, so he doesn't want to train on both weekend days. So then we're looking at Saturday. Now, being sort of 9-10 weeks out from the race, and no bunch ride on, what I'm looking for is some race replication fatigue resistance style session. So something like a longer ride, 2.5 to 3 hours, including, actually, no, he's got a 2-hour exercise limit at the moment. Okay. So we're going to be looking for the most amount of work being able to do in 2 hours. So what I'm going to actually do is go for a tempo from the door session. Now, this is probably the easiest way to cram in work, because considering he's still 10 weeks out from the race, I don't want to be doing pure race replication efforts in a ride yet. I'd rather keep the intensity down a bit, and keep it less specific, bring in the race specific work in the month before the race. So tempo from the door I feel is a perfect session, especially mentally. It's really easy to get your head around, and athletes seem to love it. So we'll go 2 hours tempo from the door, making most of his outdoor exercise limit. And what I'll also do is, he's not going to be able to do Saturday bunch this weekend, so I'm going to give it to him and update his current week, and I'm going to leave him a quick comment letting him know I've done that. Okay. All right, so I've left a comment on that, and then we've got this week done. So then we're looking at, this is an overload week, so we're going to look back at what he's done for the past 2 weeks. So he's looking at 622 T-score, close to 9 hours. TSB just getting negative. Now we're going to look at this week. Again, his CTL is actually pretty high for the amount of hours he does, so he's not going to be getting, super negative TSB values, but we're going to be looking again 8 to 9 hours. So I want this week probably using sort of a 10% overload, get this one up close to 10 hours. So at the moment, it's 5 hours, 44 minutes. So we're going to be looking at overloading in terms of removing this rest day. So usually when I'm doing that, I'm just adding in an endurance ride to replace the rest day, just as extra volume. So what I'll do is just add endurance 1.5 hours on the day he would usually have off. That takes us to 7 hours and 14 minutes, 452. Now, it might be difficult to get those hours up because, of the lack of the bunch ride. Then we've got Monday, and then so what we're going to do is look at what we're lacking. So he's coming off a rest day. Now, as soon as I see that, I think good opportunity to add in some sprint work on the fresh legs. And I'm not going to want to do anything too difficult that's going to impact this key session. So train of thought there, sprints on fresh legs, which he's going to need to race, and I don't want to put himself in a hole before he does this Tuesday session. So I'm going to be looking at, but I still want it to be volume because it's still a peak week, not a pure sprint session. So just an endurance ride with some sprint work included. So again, this one, endurance, and it's just got some sprints sprinkled in throughout the session. So that will fit in really well. That looks like a good peak week. Now, TSB is not getting too negative, just because simply of the amount of hours that the athlete's got available due to the lockdown. So it is a peak week in terms of repeated session consistency and then overloading these key sessions, but it's not a massive week in terms of load. So that then affects this next week. This doesn't need to be a week where he's barely riding. So what I'll do is use this session I left blank. I'm going to use this to give a proper session because it doesn't need to be super light. So he's coming off a recovery day. Again, another one to get the sprints in. We know sprints in an endurance ride work well at improving your efficiency and setting you up well for better adaptations in subsequent training blocks. So actually, I'm not going to add in the sprint. So sprints, I find for athletes that aren't pure sprinters, every second week is usually enough, especially because you might be sprinkling in some sprints in some of the less structured rides. So I will get him to do this sprint session in the subsequent week after the deload week. But this week, I actually want to add in some anaerobic capacity work because he's probably not going to be getting that stimulus without the bunch rides. So I will do a session where it's very effective. There's 9 30-second efforts in it, sprinkled inside an endurance ride. I think it's I've got it in here. Okay, so endurance spin with 30-second efforts, maintaining the anaerobic work capacity, and it'll also work really well in terms of setting him up for the last 5 or 6 weeks of his build into November. So I don't want it to be too long because I want this to be a pretty short, pretty low volume week. So I put this one in for 6.5 hours, 7.5. I want to keep it under 8 hours. So I'll put this in and it'll get him to do it inside an hour ride. That leaves then a pretty good week. Looking at it now, 7.5 hours. So what I'll do is I'm actually going to cut down the duration of this weekend ride. I think that's too long. So I'm going to take half an hour off that and I'll make that 2 hours. That is then a pretty good deload week where he's still progressing in the key sessions. He's maintaining his anaerobic work capacity through that session, and then he's just enjoying a lighter week on the bike. So that's a good week. And then we're going into the next 2 weeks. So after that lighter week, it's then a matter of building back up again. So what we're going to do is do the usual thing where where I put the rest days in first. So put in the sessions you need them to do. So that's looking like he always wants his Sundays off. If that's a big overload week, which I'll probably get him to do in the peak week of this next 4-week cycle, which will be build 1, build 2, build 3, which will be this week. I'll probably get him to ride on this Sunday as a form of overload. But for now, I'll keep leaving these Sundays off. So I'm scheduling the next 4 weeks. So I'll give him one more rest day here. And actually what I'll do, seeing as this week's done, is this note here, lighter week. The athletes usually don't see that because that's visible on the web, but usually they're looking at the mobile app. So what I'll do is I'm going to get rid of that. And I'm going to leave a note on the Monday of this week, letting him know that it's a peak week. So I'll just go add unstructured workout. I'll make this sport type other so he doesn't think it's another session. And I'll just add some notes around explaining how this week fits into the plan. And I'll make this here. So we've got this note on for this week, so the athlete sort of knows what's going on. And I'll also let them know as well that this is a peak week so that they know to push themselves and that this is an overload week. And so that they're firstly aware of the fatigue and also aware that they have a lighter week coming. So that it's a good opportunity to search for those extra couple percentage in most of the sessions. So I'll add that note in now. Okay. You know what? I'm going to adjust this. Having a look at this now. So this is what I also do is you put things in, and then come back a little bit later with sort of fresh eyes, and you can start to see where things might go wrong. So this is where coaching and having experience comes into play. Now this athlete here on the 5th and 6th, they've got 2 rest days in a row, and then I've put in this threshold session. Now I know most people coming off the back of 2 rest days aren't going to have a good session. So what I'm going to do is rearrange this week, predicting that they're not going to feel great on this day coming off 2 rest days. So I'm going to put in the anaerobic work capacity session here because that's an easy one to do with fresh legs. You know, most people can do a 30-second effort when they're feeling a little bit too fresh. I'm going to remove the recovery day till Thursday, and then I'm going to get them to do the threshold session on the Wednesday after having used this session, which will actually act as more as a form of openers for the next day. So slight rearrangement there. They're going to be feeling the exact same on the Friday, but that's going to allow the athlete to feel a little bit better for this session on the Wednesday, and that could get a few extra percent out. So that process of reviewing is pretty important. I think a good little gain just from that little switch there. Then we're looking at doing these next 2 weeks. So this VO2 max session, as we're getting sort of 7 weeks into before the race, I want to change this session up. They've been doing 4-minute repeats for the last 5 weeks. So I want to change that up. Now, getting close to the race, I kind of want the intensity to go up, make it more race, more specific to the race. So going into here, I want to give them 3-minute repeats instead of 4-minute repeats. So I'm going to use this session here. Now it's 6x3, so that's 18 minutes at VO2 max power, which is similar to the previous sessions. As you can see, so that was 20 minutes, and this previous one they're doing is 16 minutes. So similar amount of time at VO2 max, but because it's in 3-minute blocks, the power is going to be slightly higher. So what I'm going to do is give them that, and then future weeks I'll probably get them to repeat that. So some good progression in this VO2 max session. The other session I'm going to want to get them to repeat is this threshold session. They've been doing that 1, 2, 3 weeks. So I'm going to give that to them again for a 4th week. And the first 2 weeks is a bit of learning to do, and then you start to really bump up the power. So that's fine. Don't need to go into that. Then what I'm going to do is put in the other sessions I know they're going to need to do. Now, obviously, Saturday he's going to need to do. Now, he's going to be in lockdown at least till the start of October, which means this session is going to stay the same. I'm going to repeat the tempo from the door because he's only done that 2 weeks in a row. Then he didn't do it on the lighter week, so I'm going to get him to do it here. So holding Alt, copy it. And then I'm going to want him to overload that in this second build week. So I'm going to get him to do that for 2.5 hours at tempo, which is pretty solid. Upper limit of that session I give is usually for some really, for the more advanced riders, 3 hours. It takes a lot of fueling, so it takes some experience, but he'll be ready for it. So I'll give him 2.5 hours of that tempo from the door. So I've got that overloaded, so drop that in. I want him to do it for 2.5 hours and add that in. Okay. Then the other session that I remember I wanted him to do from this previous week was he did his anaerobic capacity work here, and I want him to do that not this week. I want him to do the sprint work again. So sprint work, fresh legs, after a rest day, bang that in on Monday. Okay, and I'll probably want him to do that again. Actually, we're getting within 7 weeks. Now, as we get a little bit closer, sometimes I like the sprint work to get a bit more specific. So instead of doing an endurance ride with sprints, I'm actually going to get him to do a sprint-specific session on this second build week. So Race replication, he's probably going to be doing these as normal sprints standing, because that's sort of in the notes of the session. But I want him to get to do a seated sprint session, which will help his ability to follow attacks in the race, and also just not be so reliant on doing a maximal standing sprint every time he wants to accelerate. So add in that seated sprint session there. Also get really good feedback on this session. People, I enjoy doing it personally, and athletes always enjoy doing it. It helps out their standing sprint power as well. So a good session there. Then, so how are we looking now? We've got 6 hours, 45 minutes. Now he's going to need another rest day, which I want him to do here. So then you come up into the thing is, in a week like this, do you give them a rest day going, before this VO2 max session, which means they might not have the best legs for this session, or do you give them the rest day here and then give them a session that acts as an opener for that? Now, if you ask me, I do it this way. So I'll give him the rest day here on the Wednesday, knowing that most athletes will perform better in key sessions with some load in the legs, and then that leaves this open for some overload. First, build week 1, build week 2. Now, this is going to be build week 3, and this is already at 7 hours and 20 minutes, 7 weeks out from a target race. Important time to be building. So what I'm going to do is I'm not going to give him a rest day on this second build week. I'm going to give him just an endurance ride to add some more aerobic volume. I will give that to him just an hour and a half. Here. Now, he doesn't really need any more intensity. He's got 2 good intense sessions per week, a big aerobic loading session, fatigue resistance session on Saturday. And I also don't want to give him, he doesn't need another threshold session. This athlete will progress with that. So then you're looking at, well, what are you doing on this extra day to keep it fun? Now, build week, you could argue you could put in another threshold session. So that might be something like his Zwift race, something unstructured. But for this week especially, I don't want him doing that yet. Let's see if he can get gains out of this week, which he will, without doing that extra session of intensity. So this is where I'll put in something, being 2 months out from target race. I'm thinking some sort of strength endurance work, whether that's short repeats, long repeats. I don't want to be too fatigued for this stage. So I'm sort of thinking short repeats, 3 or 4 minute strength endurance work, not too aerobically fatiguing, like not a key session. So I'm thinking I've got these sessions here, form session. These ones I think I've got 3 minute effort, 3 minute repeats here. Yeah, so 5x3, and then, really low RPM. So that's the sort of session I'm thinking as a way of, building some form on the bike. Science on strength endurance work isn't great, but I know that I feel great when I'm doing them. Any athlete I give them to always appreciates them and says they feel really good after them. So I'm a big proponent of them, especially in a session in a place like this where they don't need to be adding anything else. You can just give them an endurance ride, but I do think some of this strength endurance work helps, and it's not going to impact the quality of the rest of the session. So I'll give him this session. I'm going to make this in this first week. I'll make it an hour and 15 minutes. That will bring him up to 8 hours. Is that long enough for the first build week? Let's have a look at his load. So he's getting to, in this deload week, he's coming to sort of positive 19. And this week, after this session, he's positive 0.6. So that's not really long enough. I'm going to make this one longer. I'm going to make this an hour and a half. Like that. And then this week's already longer. And then so we've got a threshold session, VO2 max, aerobic loading tempo session, endurance, sprint work. This is already a solid week. And I'm going to get him to do this session again. So this is tough. So now you're looking at, for this athlete, nearly 600 T-score with a good amount of aerobic work, 10 hours, 20 minutes, which is sort of getting to the limit of what he's got time for. That'll leave this next week, which will be another peak week, to add in swap this one out for another intensity session. So then you're looking at 3 intensity sessions in the midweek and then a big aerobic loading session on the weekend. So that's the progression there.